Welcome to Human Rights Education Now, a podcast series from Human Rights Educators USA. I'm your host, Bill Fernikes, a member of the National Steering Committee of HRE USA, a collaborative network to learn, teach, organize, advocate, and innovate for human rights education in the United States. This podcast aims to raise awareness about human rights education and invites listeners to engage with the worldwide movement to make human rights education a core focus of educational programs from preschool through higher education and in both non-formal and informal community educational settings. Today's program concludes our conversation with Dr. Samuel Totten, Professor Emeritus of Education from the University of Arkansas. In this episode, Sam Totten discusses his work to develop a graduate-level program in genocide studies in Rwanda, his commitment to issues-based education and its role in advancing human rights education, individuals who served as inspiring role models for his work, the importance of intervention to prevent and/or end human rights violations and genocides, and his recommendations for advancing human rights education in the United States during a period of intense political polarization. So you mentioned earlier that you were involved in developing a graduate level program in Rwanda dealing with genocide studies.
Right.
How did that start, and what challenges did you sort of encounter in dealing with that program?
Yeah, there were some huge challenges. Well, I was actually appointed to a center at the National University of Rwanda, and it was called the Center for Conflict Management. And they worked on all sorts of issues. They had a battery of political scientists and historians working there. And I was encouraged to. Most of the people were assigned a project by the project director or the program director. When I came in, he said, well, what are you interested in doing? Do you have any ideas for projects? And I said, I do. And I mentioned that, one, I wanted to interview survivors of the genocide. And I wanted to become familiar with and conduct studies into what was called the gacaca, which was Rwanda's way early on to try cases of alleged genocidaires who were not the high-level people, not the planners, and not the bosses, who directed attacks, but the common person. And what they would do is they would bring together a group of people, I think generally about 8 or 9, who were recognized as being appreciated, respected in the community, and they would hear the different cases. And then if a person admitted that he or she was guilty, they could have their sentence cut in half. So I attended a lot of those. And I also started thinking that after speaking to people at the Center for Conflict Management, there were a lot of people who were very interested in not only the Rwandan genocide, but they started asking me questions about other genocides. And that's when I came up with the idea. When I looked into it, in regard to whether genocide was being taught anywhere at the time in Rwanda. It wasn't. And so I brought it up with the director. What about having me develop a master's degree in genocide studies? And he was all for it. And it took 3 years to finally get the curriculum ready and to begin the implementation. And where I bumped into the problems was right on the cusp of implementing this curriculum. And there were 3 or 4 things that were very disturbing. One is that uh, the Rwandans who were assigned to assist me, not in the development of the curriculum so much, but to give me resources, to introduce me to people, things of that nature. Uh, they wanted a curriculum that was Rwanda centric. They did not understand or appreciate the point of a master's degree that would look at, a half a dozen to a dozen cases. So, of course, we sat down and I talked to them about that, and we moved on. So I had finished the curriculum, and I went through all the channels at the university, and I was getting ready to teach the first course. And everything was set. I came back to the United States for a month or so, and then went back because university classes were starting. I got back and I started going over the curriculum, and I started noticing these changes. And what 2 or 3 individuals had done, they had gone through the entire curriculum, and they cut out courses and cut out courses, let's say, on the intervention of genocide. And they would put courses in that had something to do with some aspect of the Rwandan genocide. And then other places where, the professor might be discussing, for example, the Holocaust or the Bangladesh genocide, or, genocide in Guatemala. They cut that out and would put in material that was related to the Rwandan genocide. So when I came back and saw that, obviously I was not pleased at all, and sat down, had a meeting, and became quite contentious. And they were pretty set that they were not going to change the curriculum. And, at that point, I thought, well, number one, this is not my country. I'm not a professor at the university. And, it's kind of out of my hands because, if I leave, well, it could be changed again right away. So I said, well, I said, look, basically what I said is, well, let me think about this, but I don't know if I should be involved in this any longer, because it's just not what I envisioned. And, it wasn't a problem of curriculum development should come from, the bottom up, the top down, working together. And there were a number of people who were involved in this development of it. In fact, some of these individuals were, to a certain extent, in regard to suggesting topics, authors, but they were adamant that they wanted more on Rwanda. So I ended up teaching the course. It was very successful. I really enjoyed it. We had a fantastic group of people. I mean, I was amazed at the people who were in the class. We had I think, initial group of about 15. One was a Supreme Court justice. 2 were members of parliament. One was heading up a commission on the fight against genocide. I mean, it was really fascinating. There was a priest. There was a radio announcer. I mean, just absolutely fascinating. Women, men. And after the first presentation, I'll never forget, a woman came up to me and said, I never heard about that thing called the Holocaust. She said, I thought we were the only people who had ever been treated like that. And other people were standing there listening to her, and they chimed in and said the same thing. And I thought, whoa, this is a program that could be very valuable to the country. But ultimately, I did leave it behind because I didn't want to fight a battle each and every time I came back and find a curriculum that was different. So the program's still going, but exactly what they're teaching is, I do not know.
Well,
So
that's an
that was a
interesting,
huge one. Yeah.
it's an interesting issue because as you know, we're facing those types of censorship challenges in this country today.
Exactly, exactly. Um, yeah, so that was a major problem, and I mean there were other things. The other thing that was really disconcerting, as you can appreciate, is that they, meaning these individuals who wanted to change the curriculum, they wanted to put, they basically wanted to go back and revise the history, right? So there's revisionism, as you know. Revisionism is a part and parcel of historiography. History is legitimate because scholars are going to go back and they're going to probe archives, probe what's been written, come up with new insights, new ideas. So that's legit. The other, of course, is when you go back and pull something out of the curriculum or write something that's counter to the facts. What this group of people wanted to do is they wanted to make the Tutsis look like they were the ones who were correct, who did the right thing, and continue to do the right thing, and were the ones responsible for getting the country back up on its feet. So, in other words, it was going back to this situation that was going to divide the teachers and the students in the schools basically into Tutsi and Hutu. And that's despite the fact that early on, President Kagame of Rwanda stated to the entire country, we no longer have Hutus and Tutsis in this country. We are all Rwandans. And he was doing that to try to unite them. But there were differences of opinion, and these people wanted the Tutsis, to be the focus of the curriculum and the heroes of the curriculum. And I mean, the Tutsis for a long time had subjugated the Hutus, and they didn't want to include that at all. They wanted to virtually erase that. So that was another battle. And I mean, it was so frustrating, but things like that kept cropping up.
So let me take it back to the United States now, because one of the things that you've done for many, many years, and I've actually worked with you on this, is trying to provide a greater focus on issues-based education. Now, how do you see issues-based education as a pathway for human rights education? What would you say about that?
Oh, I think it's perfect. I mean, the beautiful thing about issue-centered curriculum is it's open to virtually any social issue of interest to the educator, the school, the students, whatever. And the issue of human rights, I think, is a topic, if it's taught right, that should be of great interest to students, particularly today. But I think even back 10, 20 years ago it was, because we're talking about rights, who has the rights, and that's fascinating to them, I think. But today, I think it's even more important because, as you know, in certain states, Florida being one of them, Arkansas behind Florida, but close second, Oklahoma. I mean, a number of different states are preventing teachers from either following the curriculum or selecting books to be taught, or bringing in issues such as human rights education. And a lot of the books that are being censored would be ideal for the incorporation of them into a issues-based curriculum. And I think the other beautiful thing about an issues-based curriculum is that it's interdisciplinary, and you can bring in a host of issues from different angles that would enrich the study. So I'm actually I have to say, in one respect, I'm glad I'm not teaching any longer at the university, because the universities are battling this as well. That is, what you can teach and what you can't teach. And I know myself, I'd be one of these individuals that would, want to tickle the dragon, so to speak, right? I would want to teach these issues, and I would, and no telling what the ramifications would be. But for teachers, it's very, very difficult. And as you know, the censorship is not only in public libraries, but school libraries as well. Teachers are being hung out to dry if they're caught teaching certain topics. They become almost afraid of their own shadow, and rightly so, because you never know when you're going to be attacked or who you're going to be attacked by. And censorship is rife, across this entire country. It's not just these, hyper conservative states. So it's very problematic. And I think that, if I happened to be teaching human rights education, I know what I'd want to touch on. One would certainly be crimes against humanity, war crimes, genocide. But in light of what you would teach, that is, the fact of the killing or the starvation or whatever it is, it'd be controversial. And I could see parents calling up and raising heck and getting that out of the curriculum. So I think what it's doing is it's basically throwing handcuffs on teachers and professors, to the point where they're constantly looking over their shoulder, probably asking themselves, am I going to get in trouble for this? Will I be reported for this? And then what are the ramifications? I think it's a horrible situation.
So as we sort of come to the conclusion of our discussion here, I want to ask you some questions I've asked of everybody on the podcast. And the first one deals with this. Who would you say is the most influential role model for your human rights work, either today or posthumous?
Yeah, I have, I wrote down a list, and then I thought, okay, Bill asked for one, so I better not give him the 7 or 8 that I've come up with. But over the years, you're bound to, read a lot of people, be introduced to individuals, befriend individuals. So I would have to say what I did, I hope you don't mind, is I broke this down into human rights and genocide. So human rights, there were a number of people. One early individual was David Hawk. And David Hawk was a member of Amnesty International early on, and worked his way up into the hierarchy of the organization. And I remember when I first came across David Hawk, he had a display of the boat. Was it? I think initially the boat people coming out of Vietnam. Then he had one on torture, and what he did is he put them up in the foyers of the main buildings in Washington, D.C. that housed the members of the House of Representatives, senators, and so on and so forth. And so anybody who entered would be, confronted by these posters, and they were very well done, and would stop and read. And I thought, well, this is very interesting to me, because one of the things that I was really taken with at Columbia University when I was in the doctoral program was well, a professor named Lawrence Kremen, who's a historian of education. He won a Pulitzer Prize. But one of the things that he really hit in his classes was this concept of the configuration of education. And he talked about how, teachers, professors think they have the only game in town, right? Well, not the case. And then he would go through and talk about all these different entities that were involved in education. And I thought, well, this is a classic example what David Hawk was doing, because he was reaching people who were way, way beyond their university years. And yet he was teaching them something that impacted, decisions that they were making every day, and visitors as well. And so I was really taken with that. And so he was one. I mean, Janetta Sagan was another. Janetta Sagan was involved in Amnesty International, and she was a survivor of human rights abuses and was very, very active. And I mean, these were just people who were ideas people. They came up with ideas. They came up with ways to get amnesty out, human rights out to people. They were pushing for human rights education. And so I learned a lot from them, both what they, from in regard to what they had done, in regard to the people they were associating with and sharing ideas, the people that they were reaching. So all of that was fascinating to me. And I would say later, I mean, I of course learned from people like Mandela, who I think, was an exemplar of what it means to be a good human being, to care about human rights, to care about the fact that everybody has these basic rights and they should be, protected. So that's human rights. Genocide, I'll make it quickly. Certainly, the main one was Israel Charney, who I mentioned previously. He was teaching at Tel Aviv University and then Hebrew University. And he was another one of these idea guys. And but he had actually asked me to take all of his notes for his first book and write the book for him on his first book on genocide. And I said, no, I'm not the right person for that. I said, because, at the time, I told him, I said, I don't know that much about genocide, so I just can't do that. But we became good friends, and actually, that's when I became involved in genocide studies, because of what he was doing, our talks, and the work he was doing. So I would say that, yeah, he's the first, probably the most important out of all of them.
Okay, so what quote most effectively sums up your view of the importance of human rights?
Two quotes that actually I not only like, but I more or less try to live by. And the first one is, and I quote, this is Elie Wiesel: "We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere. When human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy, national borders and sensitivities become irrelevant." End of quote. The only thing I would change there is, he says, sometimes we must interfere. Well, I think I'm in favor of intervention if people are facing something absolutely horrendous. And there are different ways to intervene. It doesn't mean going on the ground with guns. The second quote is, and I quote Elie Wiesel: wherever men and women are persecuted because of their race, religion, or political views, that place must, at that moment, become the center of the universe. It's exactly the way I feel. Exactly. And I don't know if those words, encourage me to move beyond the professor's desk or the archives or the libraries. But They probably did. Those two quotes probably did. And, I mean, it's hard to go to these places. There's no doubt. I mean, when I was up in the Nuba Mountains, I mean, it was warfare the entire time. So bombs were being dropped every single day. And every time you heard a plane, you knew it was a bomber because it was a no fly zone, except for Sudanese planes. So you knew, here they come. And it was a frightening situation for everybody. And yet, there's something about being in a place like that as well, because you're finding out, what the people are experiencing firsthand. And, getting the sense of just how difficult it is and the complexities of it. So I am committed to that. That is working on the ground and trying to help people that way. So, yeah.
Okay, so for our last question, if you had the power to make one critical change to advance human rights education in the United States, what would you recommend?
Well, Bill, I'm obsessed today with 2025. If we can call it a program or plan, that the Heritage Foundation's put together, purportedly for Trump if he gets back in. And basically, the plan is to do away with this nation as we know it. To toss out the Constitution, to give most power to Trump, to let him bring his people in throughout the government, and then basically do anything and everything he wants. Now, to me, this is the most important issue facing Americans today. And I'm not sure how many Americans have taken the time to even read aspects of 2025. One section of it is 900 pages. So I know that most people are not going to tackle that. But my sense is, if this is not focused on, we're not going to be talking about schools where there's academic freedom. We're not going to be talking about schools or libraries where there isn't censorship. Probably not even newspapers. They want to do away with what I call the legitimate journalist. So I really see it as an overbearing concern that needs to be addressed. Otherwise, everything we know in this republic and our democratic practices are going to be something of the past.
So to paraphrase, are you saying that you think that educators, for example, should mobilize to raise awareness about that and provide a counter argument?
Yeah, well, not only educators, but anybody who I think is sane. But yes, in regard to educators, and I did want to address this briefly, was, this whole issue of censorship. The censors are overwhelming everybody, overwhelming, authors getting their books into public libraries, school libraries, preventing teachers from reading, having their students read certain books, having books ripped out of the library so that kids, when they go in, they don't have the choice they used to have. I think, yes, educators ought to come together. And I think what needs to be done is like a major campaign to counter this, because part and parcel of this problem, as you well know, is how much MAGA loves disinformation and is spreading it all over the newspapers, the internet, TV, everywhere. And it's not being countered as well as it could be, at least according to my frame of mind. And I think, well, books, censorship, that's the bailiwick of educators. And it seems to me that it's something that a lot of teachers could get around. I think there would be money for it, and to come up with a real plan to counter the whole thing. They're not going to tackle 2025 on their own, that's for sure. But I think it would be quite interesting if any teachers had the guts to introduce their students to 2025 and get them asking questions. But truly, yeah, both that censorship and 2025, I think, needs to be addressed one way or another. How? I'm not exactly sure, but I think it's really important.
Well, there are some organizations like PEN America and the American Civil Liberties Union and others that are trying to deal with it. But I think
That's
the
right.
suggestion of a national campaign, I think, is right on target.
Yeah.
Well, Sam, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I wanted to thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Thanks for listening to Human Rights Education Now. You can find additional information about this podcast series at www.hreusa.org. Each episode is available on Buzzsprout, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Pocket Casts, Player FM, and Deezer. You can also download each episode as an MP3 file. If you have questions or comments about this podcast, send them to Christy at hreusa.org. That's KRISTI at hreusa.org. Our podcast team includes producer and editor Bill Fernikes, executive producer Christy Redelius Palmer, editor Elizabeth Schwab, sound designer and project manager Sabrina Sanchez, communications and public outreach coordinator Jessica Derbruggen, and production coordinator Jasmine Chizu Gota. Human Rights Education Now is a production of Human Rights Educators USA, a project of the Center for Transformative Action in Ithaca, New York.